At 17, my parents tossed me out like trash. "You'll be back begging," my mother snapped. As my father slammed the door, I swallowed my rage and vanished. Now, 9 years later, they're blowing up my phone like I owe them something. I wasn't planning on ever sharing this publicly. Honestly, it's still hard to talk about even years later. But after reading a few posts from people going through similar things with their families, I figured maybe getting this all out would help me or maybe someone else. So here goes. I'm Mason. I'm 26 now. But this story starts when I was 17, midway through my junior year of high school. If you looked at my life from the outside back then, you'd probably think it was normal. My dad worked at a packaging warehouse. My mom handled phones at a dental clinic. We weren't rich, but we were okay. Our town was small enough that everybody knew your business, so keeping up appearances mattered to a lot of people, especially my parents. They had my whole life mapped out since before I could walk. Good grades, in-state college, degree in business like my dad, marry some nice girl from church, settle down in the suburbs with 2 kids and a dog, and live out the American checklist. The problem? I hated almost every step of that plan. It wasn't that I was failing school, I could get decent grades when I focused. But that was the issue. I have ADHD, something I didn't get diagnosed with until much later. Back then, I just thought I was broken. I couldn't sit through lectures without zoning out. I'd fidget constantly, forget assignments, feel like I was being smothered by the weight of expectations I didn't even want. The only time I ever felt truly good at something was when I was building things. Working with my hands made me feel like I could actually breathe. One summer when I was 15, I helped our neighbor, Mr. Langston, remodel his garage. He was a retired contractor and let me do actual work, hanging drywall, fixing wiring, painting, the whole deal. For the first time in my life, I felt confident. Like maybe I wasn't broken, maybe I just learned differently. I tried telling my parents that I wanted to go into the trades. Their reaction was not great. My mom looked at me like I'd just told her I was going to live in a dumpster. My dad went on one of his rants about wasting potential and how people like us didn't settle for manual labor. That word settle stuck with me. Like wanting to build things with my hands was some form of failure. Over time, the tension at home started to feel like a stretched rubber band, one wrong move and it was going to snap. I was working part-time at a hardware store after school and saving every cent I could. Something in me just knew I'd need it. Meanwhile, every dinner turned into a silent war zone. They'd bring up college, I'd deflect. They'd mention career paths, I'd change the subject. They said I was throwing away my future. I said they never asked what I wanted. The breaking point came in mid-April, about 6 weeks before graduation. I had gotten into Millbrook State, the same college my dad went to. My parents practically filled out the application themselves. But I'd also applied to a technical program in a nearby city focused on residential construction. It was shorter, cheaper, and more importantly, I actually wanted it. They offered me a partial scholarship based on a portfolio I'd built of my work with Mr. Langston and other odd jobs. I decided to tell them over dinner. I still don't know what I expected. Maybe anger, maybe disappointment, but not what happened. I said something like, I've been accepted into the vocational program. It's a good opportunity and I've decided to go. My dad threw his fork so hard it bounced off his plate and clattered onto the floor. My mom looked like I'd just told her I joined a cult. And then came the shouting. "You're spitting in the face of everything we've done for you," my dad yelled. "I just don't understand where we went wrong," my mom sobbed. "Why would you choose this?" I tried to explain that it wasn't about rejecting them, it was about choosing something that made sense to me. That I wanted a future I could actually picture myself in. My dad cut me off. "I'm done listening to this garbage. No son of mine is going to waste his life digging ditches like some dropout. If that's the path you want, then maybe you're not the son we thought you were." Something snapped in me right then. A fuse blew and the lights went out in my chest. I said things I'm not proud of. They did too. It got brutal fast. Words we couldn't take back. Eventually, my dad pointed at the door and said, "If you won't follow our rules, then get out. Go make your own future." I think he expected me to beg. To crumble. Instead, I stood up and walked upstairs. I had a bag already packed in the back of my closet. Maybe I didn't expect to leave that night, but I always had a gut feeling I'd need an exit strategy. I shoved in a few more clothes, my laptop, my important documents, and the $1,200 I'd saved from work. When I came downstairs with the duffel over my shoulder, my parents looked frozen. Like they hadn't actually thought I'd do it. "You're making a mistake," my mom whispered. "You'll be back within a month. The real world is harder than you think." My dad just crossed his arms and stared at the wall. I walked out the front door. It was raining. Of course it was raining. The kind of heavy, cinematic rain that makes you feel like the universe is trying to add a dramatic soundtrack to your breakdown. I stood there on the lawn for a minute, soaking wet, not even knowing where I was going, just that I wasn't going back. I called my friend Nate. His parents were chill, some of the only adults I knew who treated me like a person. They said I could crash on the couch for a while. I walked 2 miles to their place in the rain, each step heavier than the last. Those first few nights were a blur. I still went to school, still worked at the hardware store, but I was technically homeless. 17 years old, living out of a duffel bag, trying to keep it together. I'd have panic attacks in the bathroom between classes. Sometimes I'd zone out during math, then realize I hadn't eaten all day. But you know what kept me going? Anger. Pure stubborn, I'll show you rage. Every time I wanted to give up, I thought about my dad's voice, no son of mine. I thought about my mom's smirk when she said I'd come crawling back. I promised myself I wouldn't. Not in a month. Not ever. Nate's mom helped me apply for emergency youth housing aid. My school counselor, shout out to Ms. Valdez, one of the few people who really gave a damn, walked me through the process of emancipation. I picked up a second job, dishes at a local diner on weekends. The hardest part wasn't money or sleep. It was emotional whiplash. Seeing classmates complain about their parents grounding them while mine had told me I didn't belong anymore. Watching kids get hugs at graduation rehearsals while I pretended not to care that mine hadn't asked if I had a cap and gown. About 3 weeks after I left, my mom sent me a text. Not, are you okay? Not, we miss you. Just, when you're ready to apologize and come home under our conditions, let us know. I didn't respond. A few days later, my dad left a voicemail. Same message, different voice. They were just waiting for me to fail. To grovel. To admit they were right. Instead, I finished high school. Nate's parents clapped louder than anyone else in the auditorium. My parents showed up, by the way, stood in the back, like distant relatives. I walked past them without a word. By June, I had enough saved to split rent with 2 other guys in a crumbling apartment. It had roaches, peeling wallpaper, and smelled vaguely like old soup. But it was mine. I started the trade program that fall, juggling classes and shifts at the diner. It was hard. It was exhausting. And it was the first time I ever felt like my life actually belonged to me. I cried a lot that first year. From stress. From loneliness. From grief over the family I used to believe I had. But I never went crawling back. Not in a month. Not in 9 years. And that was just the beginning. The first few months on my own were hell, to put it bluntly. I'd done the dramatic walk into the night, bag over my shoulder, rain soaking through my hoodie like I was in some angsty indie movie. But the credits didn't roll. Life just kept going, harder, louder, and more confusing than ever. After crashing at Nate's house for a couple of weeks, I moved into an apartment that can only be described as a health violation with walls. It was a 2-bedroom unit split between 3 people, me, a guy named Devin who worked graveyard shifts and practically lived in his hoodie, and Trey, who may or may not have been selling weed out of our living room. I never asked. He paid rent on time and didn't touch my stuff, so I minded my business. The place had roaches that were bold enough to hang out in daylight. The oven smoked every time you turned it on, even if you weren't cooking anything. The bathroom light flickered like we were hosting a haunted house. But it was rent-splittable, and no one was telling me I was a failure for wanting to be an electrician instead of a corporate puppet. So yeah, I called it home. I was juggling 2 jobs at that point. Weeknights at the hardware store, where my main duties were lifting heavy stuff and pretending to know things about power tools. Weekends were all about the diner, mostly dishwashing, sometimes bussing tables when someone called in sick. Between both jobs and my trade program, I was lucky to sleep 4 hours a night. Food became creative. Most days, I survived on ramen, gas station sandwiches, and whatever leftovers I could smuggle out of the diner without feeling like a thief. Fries that didn't get touched, the last pancake that someone sent back because it was too soft, I'd eat it in the supply closet while pretending to reorganize the paper towels. I lost almost 25 pounds in 3 months. My jeans started falling off my hips and I had to punch new holes in my belt. I looked like a cross between a raccoon and a scarecrow, pale, twitchy, and always tired. Social media didn't help. I'd scroll through Instagram and see kids my age at college parties, posting from beaches on spring break or brunching with their smiling families. Meanwhile, I was wondering if I could skip doing laundry 1 more week because the laundromat ate quarters and I needed those quarters for the bus. Despite all that, I still didn't call home. Not once. My parents did though. Well, called, texted, left voicemails. But none of them were what you'd hope to hear from people who kicked out their teenage son. Not a single, "Are you eating?" Not one, "Do you have a place to sleep?" It was always variations of, "When are you going to stop this nonsense and come home?" Always on their terms. I could come back, sure, but only if I apologized, admitted I'd been wrong, and agreed to rejoin the life they picked out for me. I remember one afternoon in late July, I was restocking light bulbs at the hardware store when my coworker nudged me and said, "Hey, some guy's asking for you up front." Real dad vibes. My stomach sank. I peeked through the aisle. And there he was. My father. Standing awkwardly near the front counter, hands in his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them, staring at the paint samples like they might offer him answers. I ducked into the back stockroom and didn't come out. Watched him through the security window, just standing in the parking lot for a solid 15 minutes before he finally got in his car and drove off. He never came back. Something shifted after that. I don't know if it was seeing him in my space, the store where I was figuring out how to survive, or if I was just too exhausted to care anymore. But I started to feel less like a scared kid and more like someone clawing their way into a life. And then came Santiago. Santiago was one of our regulars. Middle-aged, always in cargo pants, usually buying stuff for some remodeling job. He had this chill, no-bullshit vibe that made him easy to talk to. One day he came in looking for a specific type of pipe fitting. I helped him find it, then showed him how to install it, even drew a quick diagram on the back of a receipt. He raised an eyebrow and said, "You ever consider doing this kind of work for real?" Turned out he ran his own small renovation company, kitchens, bathrooms, flooring, that kind of stuff. Nothing huge, but steady. He asked if I wanted to help out on a few jobs here and there. The pay wasn't amazing, but it beat the diner, and it was exactly what I was training to do. I jumped at the offer. Working with Santiago felt like stepping into a completely different world, one where people didn't look down on you for using your hands. He respected the craft. He took time to show me the right way to do things, why a certain joint needed reinforcement, how to prep drywall for seamless painting, how to set a toilet so it wouldn't rock after installation. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that I felt like someone saw me for who I was, not who I was supposed to be. A few months later, things started to stabilize. I moved out of the Roach Motel and into a less terrible place with just one roommate, Aiden, a nursing student who also worked nights and understood the concept of not leaving dishes in the sink for a week. We split groceries, took turns cleaning, and kept each other from spiraling. By the time I turned 19, I had my first certification under my belt and was doing decent side gigs through Santiago, ceiling fan installations, leaky faucet fixes, even a full bathroom demo once. Nothing glamorous, but it paid bills. I wasn't rich, but I was eating better, sleeping a little more, and for the first time since walking out of my parents' house, I felt like I had some control over my life. That's when the texts started changing. First, my mom sent a message saying, "We miss you." No strings attached. Just that. Then my dad followed up a week later with a weirdly formal message, "We're open to discussing a compromise on your education if you're ready to come home." It made me angrier than I expected. Now they were open to compromise? After throwing me out? After months of silence or guilt trips? After acting like I was garbage for not wanting to be their version of success? Hard pass. I didn't respond. Instead, I poured myself into my classes and work. The more I learned, the more I realized I wasn't too stupid for school, I just hadn't been interested in what I was being taught before. Learning how to wire a house, fix plumbing, or build a staircase actually made sense to me. I thrived in it. And Santiago? He noticed. He started giving me more responsibility. Better pay. Bigger projects. I was building a small list of clients through word of mouth, neighbors telling neighbors, "Call Mason, he knows his stuff." Some days I'd still go home and collapse, but it was a satisfying kind of tired. Not the soul-draining burnout I'd known before. I also started noticing something strange while working in people's homes. I'd overhear little snippets, parents cheering when their kid got a B+, moms hugging their kids just because, dads making space for their sons to talk about what they wanted instead of dictating it. Family pictures on the wall, kids' artwork on the fridge, that warm background hum of unconditional love. It hit me hard. I'd spent so long convincing myself that what my parents did was normal, that being loved only when I performed well or obeyed was just part of the deal. But that wasn't true. I'd just been living in a house with conditions instead of connection. That realization gutted me. It also started the slow process of healing. When I was almost 20, my mom showed up at my apartment. No warning. Just knocked on the door like it was a casual drop-in. I didn't recognize her at first. She looked tired. Smaller, somehow. I let her in. I didn't know what else to do. She looked around the apartment with this tight expression, not quite disgust, but definitely judgment. She asked surface-level questions. Are you working? Do you cook for yourself? Do you have a savings account? Then she got to the point. My dad had been passed over for a promotion. They were struggling financially. She didn't outright ask for money, but it was heavily implied. And I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out, this bitter, disbelieving bark of laughter. Now they needed me? 2 years ago, they tossed me out like garbage. Now they were dropping hints about needing help, without ever once saying we were wrong, without acknowledging what they'd done. I told her I was still building my life and couldn't spare anything. She looked disappointed. Didn't say she was proud of me. Just frowned and left. After that visit, I spiraled a little. Started questioning myself. Was I being cruel by keeping distance? Was I bitter? Was I punishing them? But then I'd remember everything. The night I left. My mom's smirk. My dad slamming the door. The way they only called when they wanted something. And I'd get angry all over again. That's when Aiden introduced me to his friend Ruby. She was studying psychology, and we ended up talking one night over cheap pizza and laundry. She helped me realize something I hadn't put into words before. What I went through wasn't just tough parenting. It was emotional abuse, conditional love, manipulation dressed up as guidance. And it had scarred me more deeply than I wanted to admit. Ruby didn't fix me, but she helped me start the process of fixing myself. By 21, I had moved into my own one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No roommates. No parents. Just me, my second-hand couch, and walls that didn't echo with shouting. That first night, I sat on the floor and cried until my chest hurt. I'd made it further than anyone thought I could. And somehow I was just getting started. By the time I turned 24, life had finally settled into something that resembled stability. I had enough clients coming through Santiago's company that I wasn't panicking at the end of every month. My apartment, still small, still cluttered with mismatched furniture, felt more like a home than any place I'd lived before. I had a routine, a rhythm, and for the first time in years, it felt like I was breathing normally. I'd stopped expecting apologies from my parents. At that point, I'd gone years without any real conversation with them that didn't somehow involve guilt, passive aggression, or a thinly veiled request for something. I wasn't exactly at peace with it, but I was used to it. So when I was mindlessly scrolling through Facebook one night, yeah, I still use it sometimes, sue me, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. My cousin Taylor had tagged me in a photo from some family barbecue I obviously hadn't been invited to. I clicked out of curiosity, half expecting to see the usual. Burgers, paper plates, someone's baby with cake on their face. But there, in the background of the picture, were my parents. My mom had that fake smile she always used when she was trying too hard, and my dad looked mid-sentence, probably telling one of his 3 go-to stories about high school football. But what stopped me cold was the framed photo on the table next to them. It was me, specifically my high school graduation photo. The one they barely acknowledged in real life. The one they showed up for, stood in the back like strangers, and left without saying a word. Now it was front and center like I was some beloved prodigal son they'd nurtured and launched into the world. I called Taylor immediately. Hey, weird question, I said. Why is my graduation picture in that photo from Aunt Marcy's? Oh, your parents brought it, she said casually. They talk about you all the time now, always going on about how proud they are of what you've done. I had to mute myself for a second so she wouldn't hear me laugh. That bitter kind of laugh that hits you in the gut more than the chest. Proud? They were proud? Of what exactly? That I survived after they kicked me out? That I built a life they told me I'd never be able to handle? It was like they'd rewritten history in their heads. A neat little narrative where I'd gone off and found myself after a tough patch. And they were the brave, supportive parents cheering me on from a distance. Not the people who slammed the door in my face when I was 17. I tried to shake it off, but it stuck with me. And as life would have it, right around that time, I met someone. Her name was Elise. We met in line at Target, of all places, both complaining about how the self-checkout machines were down for maintenance again. She was sharp, sarcastic, and had the kind of chaotic energy that made conversations with her feel like roller coasters. Somehow, we started talking, followed each other on Instagram, and before I knew it, we were texting constantly. On our third date, over cheap tacos and way too much hot sauce, the conversation turned to family. I braced myself. Usually, when I told people about mine, I got some version of the awkward, "Oh wow, that's rough" reply, followed by silence or a topic change. But Elise surprised me. She didn't flinch. Instead, she told me about her own complicated relationship with her stepdad. Not the same story, but the same energy. Controlling. Conditional. Always using love like a contract with fine print. That night, we ended up talking until nearly 3 a.m. on a park bench outside her apartment building. For the first time, I let someone really see that part of me. Not just the timeline, but the grief, the resentment, the guilt for still wanting something from people who'd thrown me away. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened. And that, weirdly, started to heal something. A few months into dating Elise, my apartment's water heater died. Like full-on burst a pipe, flood the bathroom, cold showers for days, kind of dead. My landlord, being the human embodiment of duct tape and delay, told me it'd be at least a week before he could get a guy out there. Elise offered to let me stay at her place. First, I said no. That independent streak, the one forged out of fear and pride and teenage stubbornness, kicked in hard. I wasn't ready to admit I needed help, even from someone I trusted. Instead, I showered at the gym, ate microwave noodles in the dark, and told myself this was fine. I'd been through worse, right? But on day 3, she showed up at my door with clean towels, shampoo, and a Tupperware of homemade curry, looked me dead in the eye and said, "This is getting stupid. Pack a bag. You're staying with me until the water works again." So I did. And it was the first time I felt something close to safe in years. Around the same time, my old high school friend Jonah got engaged and invited me to the wedding. It had been years since I'd seen most of those people. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would they remember me as the kid who disappeared? The guy who gave up on college? The story parents whispered about? I went with Elise. And surprisingly, it was fine. Better than fine, actually. People asked what I was up to. When I told them I was doing contracting and residential repairs, no one made a face. No one said, "Oh, but you were so smart." They just nodded like it was a perfectly valid thing to do with your life. Because, you know, it is. Then came the awkward moment. Jonah's mom pulled me aside during the reception. She'd been one of the first people to help me after I left home, let me crash for a few days, gave me rides when I didn't have a car, even slipped me a $20 once, just in case. She was the closest thing I had to a parental figure at that time. She said, "Your folks have been asking about you." Apparently, they'd run into her at the grocery store and spent 20 minutes fishing for information, where I lived, what I was doing, if I was managing okay. That last part, managing, hit me sideways. It wasn't concern. It was curiosity. Were their predictions coming true? Was I failing? Was I finally desperate enough to crawl back? A week later, I got a text from my mom. "Mason, we're hosting a little get-together for Memorial Day. Would love to see you. You're welcome to bring your friend." Not girlfriend. Not Elise. Friend. Subtle, right? I showed the text to Elise. She raised one eyebrow and said, "They want something." She wasn't wrong. I decided to go. Curiosity? Closure? I'm not sure. Maybe a little of both. Elise came with me, though she warned me this has disaster written all over it. The moment I stepped into that house, I knew. Same furniture. Same overly sweet apple cinnamon air freshener. Same family portraits on the wall, only now my graduation photo was front and center, like I'd been some hero off at war instead of the kid they threw out. The get-together was small. My parents, my aunt and uncle, some old friend of my dad's and his wife. Everyone acted normal. Too normal. Like we were picking up after a college semester abroad instead of years of silence and emotional warfare. We ate barbecue. My dad told outdated jokes. My mom asked Elise about her job like she wasn't mentally assessing whether Elise's degree made her respectable enough. After dinner, my dad asked me to talk in his study. That room had always been off-limits growing up. It was his shrine. His throne. The place he'd go when he didn't want to be bothered by things like emotions or conversations. I followed him in. He started slow. Small talk. The economy. How things are tight these days. Then he got to the point. He'd been laid off. After 27 years. They replaced him with some kid with a degree who'll work for peanuts. The irony almost made me laugh. He didn't outright ask for money. But he didn't have to. The hints were thick. It's been a tough year. Family supports each other in hard times. Maybe now you see how unstable trade work can be. I said I'd think about it. That night, I got flooded with texts from my mom. "How are you doing? Did you think about what Dad mentioned? Do you need our old dining table? We're redoing the house. Translation, we're selling furniture to make ends meet. Then came the Facebook post. A long, dramatic update about leaning on faith during hard times and being grateful for our son Mason who's supporting us through this difficult chapter. I hadn't given them a dime. I called her immediately. What was that post? Oh, I was just expressing gratitude, she said innocently. People assumed things. Right? Assumed. Because she framed it that way on purpose, so I'd feel guilty when relatives praised me in the comments as the good son. That night, I found myself hunched over a spreadsheet, trying to figure out if I could afford to help them without wrecking everything I'd built. Elise sat next to me. She didn't tell me what to do. She just asked, if your best friend were in this situation, what would you tell him? And I knew the answer instantly. I'd tell him he didn't owe them a thing. So I texted my mom. Told her I wasn't in a position to support them financially. That I was still recovering from the trauma of being kicked out. That they could look into the same resources I once relied on. She replied with a single word, okay. Then silence. 3 weeks later, I woke up to 27 missed calls. My parents, my aunts, my uncles, even people I barely knew from church. Apparently, the situation had gotten worse. Much worse. Foreclosure. No savings. Car totaled. And according to them, I was the one who had to fix it. I wasn't sure what would happen next. But I knew one thing, this time I would set the terms. The day before the biggest investor meeting of my career, my mom called me 4 times in a row. I ignored the first one. Honestly, I had too much going on. I was prepping slides, running numbers, rehearsing in front of my bathroom mirror like a lunatic. This meeting was the culmination of 5 years of grinding, working my way up through Santiago's business, earning certifications, taking side gigs, learning how to bid on contracts. It was a shot at real independence. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore, I was building something that might actually last. But the calls kept coming. For missed ones from my mom, then one from my aunt, then a message from my cousin that just said, you should probably call your mom. When I finally picked up, she was crying so hard I could barely make out the words. After a few minutes, I got the story. My dad had lost his second job, the temp one he picked up after the layoff. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. The car had broken down. They'd received a formal notice. If they didn't come up with the money in 2 weeks, the bank would take the house. Their house. The same one they'd thrown me out of at 17. I sat in my office, staring at the framed certification on the wall. The one I got after passing my second trade exam. The one I paid for with overtime hours and cold diner pancakes eaten out of a paper towel. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt tired. It kicked me out. Ignored me. Tried to guilt me into coming back. Tried to rewrite history when it suited them. And now, in the most dramatic, full-circle twist possible, I was the only person who could keep them from losing the roof over their heads. And they were calling in every relative, every emotional debt they could think of to make sure I felt the pressure. I told my mom I'd call her back. Then I turned off my phone, closed my office door, and finished preparing for the meeting. One crisis at a time. The meeting went better than I ever could have expected. The investors loved the proposal. They asked hard questions and I had good answers. They were already talking about potential funding for future projects. It was a win. A big one. And all I could think about was how my phone would explode the second I turned it back on. I was right. 27 missed calls. 14 voicemails. Messages from cousins I hadn't seen since high school, all saying things like family sticks together and you're in a position to help now. I wasn't even mad. Just numb. When I walked into my apartment that night, Elise was on the couch with her laptop. She looked up and said, "So, your mom posted something." I sat down next to her and read the Facebook post. It was long, dramatic, full of emotional buzzwords, hard times, trusting God's plan, never thought we'd be here. But what really got me was the last paragraph. We're so grateful to have our son Mason supporting us through this difficult time. Family truly is everything. My name. Right there. Publicly attached to the idea that I was already supporting them financially, emotionally, whatever. I hadn't given them a cent. The comments were full of people praising me. Such a good son. You raised him right. God bless Mason for stepping up. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. They were doing it again. Crafting a narrative. One where they were the struggling heroes and I was the dutiful, loving son swooping in to save the day. And I was nowhere in that story, not really. Just a prop. A pawn. A name they could use to make themselves look better. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. Started making a spreadsheet. expenses, rent, utilities, upcoming licensing fees, equipment I needed for the next project. I tried to find space in the margins, a few hundred here, maybe cut back on groceries there. Elise walked in quietly. She looked at the screen, then at me. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Trying to figure out if I can help them without wrecking my life." She didn't say anything at first. Then she put her hand on mine and asked, "What would you say to a friend in your position?" And just like that, I knew the answer. I'd say, "You don't owe them anything." So I closed the spreadsheet. That night, I texted my mom. I told her I wasn't going to provide financial support, that I was still recovering from the years I spent picking up the pieces after they kicked me out, that there were local resources for families in financial distress, the same ones I'd used when I was 17 and sleeping on a friend's couch. She replied with a single word. "Okay." Then nothing. Radio silence for days, until the storm hit. I woke up 3 days later to my phone vibrating like it was trying to escape the nightstand. Dozens of calls, voicemails, texts, messages on Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. Apparently, the foreclosure was moving faster than expected. My parents were officially in default. Their house was going to auction. My aunt left a voicemail that said, "It's time for you to be the man your father raised you to be." The irony of that sentence made me laugh out loud. That night, Elise and I sat on the floor of our apartment and talked. 4 hours. About boundaries. About love. About the difference between forgiving and forgetting. Eventually, I said, "I'll meet with them. One last time. But it's going to be on my terms." We agreed on neutral ground. A coffee shop near the edge of town. I went alone. They looked older. Smaller. My mom's hair was thinner. My dad's shoulders were stooped like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. They started with pleasantries. I cut them off. "I'm going to talk," I said. "And you're going to listen." I laid it all out. How they threw me out at 17. How they told me I'd fail. How I cried myself to sleep in a moldy apartment. How I worked 2 jobs and lived off leftover diner fries while they pretended I didn't exist. How they only contacted me when they wanted something. My dad tried to interrupt, to give excuses. I held up my hand and said, "No more." I told them I wasn't their savior. That they'd made choices. That I'd built a life without them. That they were lucky I even showed up. Then I gave them 4 options. 1. I would pay off the back mortgage once. No repeats. 2. They would take down the Facebook post and publicly state that they were handling their own finances. 3. If they wanted any relationship with me going forward, we would go to therapy. Together. Not for reconciliation, but for boundaries. 4. They would accept that my life, my career, my partner, my choices were not up for debate. They were stunned. My mom started crying. My dad just looked tired. Eventually, they agreed. Not happily. Not with grace. But they agreed. I wrote the check right there in the coffee shop. Not because I owed them, but because I needed this chapter closed. I needed to be the one to end it on my terms. As we walked out, my dad paused on the sidewalk. For a second, I thought he was going to say something snide. One last jab. Instead, he said, "You turned out okay. Better than okay. Not how I pictured it. But you did good." I didn't respond right away. Just stood there. Then I said, "I know." And I walked to my car. It's been a few months since that day. They've kept up their side of the deal so far. The Facebook post disappeared. They're looking at smaller homes. Therapy is awkward and slow and messy. But it's happening. I don't know if we'll ever be close. I'm not sure we should be. But at least now, whatever relationship we have is built on something real, not guilt, not performance, not manipulation. Just truth. The day they removed that post, I went into my phone and deleted every missed call and voicemail they'd left in that crazy, chaotic week. They'd been sitting there like a weight, 47 unread messages, each one louder than the last. Watching them disappear felt peaceful. Not satisfying. Not victorious. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I finally heard something I hadn't in years. My own voice. My own strength. The voice of a 17-year-old kid who once stood in the rain with a duffel bag and no clue how to survive and figured it out anyway. Turns out they were wrong. I didn't need them to make it. But in the end, they needed me. And that truth? That was worth more than any apology they could ever give.